In October 2003, Clint Eastwood's regular driver called him at 6:47 inches the morning to say he couldn't make the 7 a.m. airport run. Food poisoning, urgent, apologetic, impossible. Clint had a flight to catch at 9:15, a meeting in San Francisco that couldn't be rescheduled, and exactly 13 minutes to find another driver. What happened in the car that morning and what the replacement driver learned about the passenger in his back seat became the kind of story that changes how you see both fame and ordinary kindness. Marcus Webb was 28 years old, and he'd been driving for a car service in Los Angeles for 6 months. It was a temporary job. He'd moved to L.A. 2 years earlier to be a screenwriter, and like most people who moved to L.A. to be screenwriters, he was still waiting for someone to read his scripts. He had 3 finished screenplays in a folder on his laptop. He'd sent them to 47 different people, agents, managers, producers, anyone whose email he could find. He'd gotten back exactly 3 responses. All of them were polite variations of no. The driving paid his rent. Barely. $400 a week after gas and car maintenance. But it put him in proximity to the industry he was trying to break into, and occasionally, very occasionally, he'd drive someone who actually worked in film, and he'd have 5 minutes to make an impression. He'd never made an impression that led anywhere. But he kept trying. At 6:50 on that Tuesday morning, Marcus was asleep in his studio apartment in North Hollywood when his phone rang. He grabbed it without opening his eyes, saw dispatch on the screen, and answered. Yeah, he said, voice rough with sleep. Marcus, it's Jenny. Emergency pickup. Regular driver called in sick. Client needs to get to LAX. Can you be there in 12 minutes? Marcus sat up. 12 minutes meant no shower, no coffee, just clothes and keys and go. What's the address? Jenny read it off. Hollywood Hills. Wait, Marcus said. The client name shows Carmel area code. The pickup is in Carmel? Client's in L.A., Jenny said. Carmel office made the booking. Regular L.A. driver just canceled. You're closest. He needs to leave now. I'll be there, Marcus said. He was always saying yes. That's what you did when you were 28 and broke and still believed that the next job might be the one that changed everything. He threw on clean clothes, grabbed his keys, and made it to the address in 12 minutes. A house in the Hollywood Hills. Not a mansion, but nice, understated, the kind of place that suggested money without performing it. Marcus pulled up at 7:03. 3 minutes late. He was getting out to ring the bell when the front door opened and a man came out. Tall, lean, probably in his early 70s. Silver hair, jeans and a button-down shirt, a small carry-on bag, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd caught a lot of early flights. Marcus opened the back door. Good morning. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. You're fine, the man said. He got in, set his bag on the seat beside him, and settled back. Marcus got behind the wheel. LAX, right? That's right. Marcus pulled out. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was looking out the window. His face was familiar in the vague way that older faces in Los Angeles were sometimes familiar, like maybe Marcus had seen him at a restaurant, or maybe he just looked like someone's grandfather. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Marcus tried to place him. Someone in the industry, probably. A producer, maybe? He looked too old to be an actor, but you never knew. Marcus glanced at the pickup sheet clipped to his visor. Just a last name, Eastwood. After about 10 minutes, Marcus decided to try. So, you heading somewhere good? San Francisco. Just for the day. Nice. Business or pleasure? Meeting. That was it. The man wasn't rude. He just wasn't interested in conversation. Marcus had driven enough people to recognize the difference between someone who was cold and someone who was simply private. He let it go. They drove. Morning traffic was building, but not terrible yet. Marcus took surface streets to avoid the worst of it. Sunset to La Cienega, cutting through neighborhoods he'd learned in 6 months of doing this work. He was a good driver, careful, smooth. He anticipated lights, took turns without making passengers feel them. He'd learned that the people who hired car services didn't want conversation. They wanted to arrive at their destination, having not noticed the drive at all. That was the skill, invisible competence. About 20 minutes in, the man in the back seat spoke. "You've been doing this long?" Marcus looked up at the mirror. "Driving? About 6 months. You like it?" "It's fine. Pays the bills." "What do you actually want to do?" Marcus hesitated. He'd learned not to tell passengers he was a screenwriter. It always made things awkward. Either they'd feel obligated to offer advice they didn't want to give, or they'd assume he was networking, or they'd just think he was another dreamer clogging up L.A. But something about the way the man asked, not polite small talk, but actual curiosity, made Marcus answer honestly. "I write screenplays. That's why I'm here." "Sold anything yet?" "Not yet. Still trying." The man nodded. "How long you been writing?" "Seriously, about 4 years." "That's not very long." "Feels long when you're doing it," Marcus said. The man smiled slightly. "I suppose it does. What kind of things do you write?" "Character stuff, mostly. Small stories, people making hard choices, not superheroes." "Not superheroes," Marcus agreed. "Good," the man said. Then he went quiet again. They drove for another 15 minutes in silence. Marcus thought that was the end of it. But then the man spoke again. "You think everybody in this town is trying to write?" Marcus laughed. "Feels like it, sometimes." "They are," the man said, "and most of them will quit in 2 years. Some will quit in 5. A few will quit after 10. The ones who don't quit are the ones who might actually make it, not because they're more talented, because they didn't quit." Marcus looked at him in the mirror. "You work in the industry?" "I've been around it a while." "You're a producer?" "I've produced some things." Marcus felt a small surge of interest. "Anything I'd know?" "Maybe. Probably not worth getting into." They drove. The freeway opened up ahead. LAX was 30 minutes away. The man had gone quiet again, looking out the window at the morning light hitting the buildings along La Cienega. Marcus thought about letting the silence sit. But there was something about this conversation, something about the way the man had talked about the work, about quitting, about doing things because they mattered, that made Marcus want to ask the question he'd been carrying around for 6 months. Marcus decided to push slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How do you know when to quit?" Like, actually quit. Not just take a break, but admit it's not going to happen, that you gave it your best shot, and it's time to do something else. The man turned from the window. Marcus could see him in the rear view mirror, thinking about the question, really thinking about it, not just waiting to give advice, but actually considering what the answer was. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You quit when you stop caring about the work. If you're still making things because you care about making them, because the process itself matters to you, because you wake up thinking about the story, because you do it even if nobody ever saw it, then you haven't hit the quit point yet. But if you're only doing it because you think it'll lead somewhere, and it's not leading anywhere, and the process has become a chore you resent, and you're miserable, then you should probably do something else. Do something that doesn't make you miserable." "Are you still making things?" Marcus asked. "I am." "Does it still matter to you?" "More than it used to," the man said quietly. They pulled into the airport loop, Terminal 6. The man gathered his bag. Marcus pulled to the curb. He got out, went around, opened the door. The man stepped out, straightened his jacket. "Thanks for the ride," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Oh, it's covered," Marcus said. "The service bills directly." "I know," the man said. He pulled out $200 bills and handed them to Marcus. "This is for the conversation." Marcus stared at the money. "I can't take this." "You can. You listened. That's worth something." Marcus took the bills. He didn't know what else to do. "Thank you." The man extended his hand. "Good luck with your writing. Don't quit unless you stop caring." Marcus shook his hand. "I won't. Thank you." The man picked up his bag and walked into the terminal. He didn't look back. He just moved through the automatic doors and disappeared into the crowd of early morning travelers. Marcus got back in the car. He sat there for a moment, holding the $200, replaying the conversation in his head. Something was nagging at him. The voice, the face, the way the man had talked about the work. He pulled out his phone and called dispatch. "Hey, who was that pickup? The emergency one this morning? Let me check." A pause. "Eastwood. Clint Eastwood." Marcus sat very still. He'd just spent 40 minutes in a car with Clint Eastwood, the man who directed Unforgiven and Million Dollar Baby, who'd been making films about people making hard choices for 50 years, who'd given him $200 and told him not to quit. And Marcus had asked him if he was a producer. He'd asked Clint Eastwood if he'd produced some things. And Clint had just said yes and kept talking. Marcus started laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was the most Los Angeles thing that had ever happened to him. He'd been driving around one of the greatest filmmakers in American cinema, asking him if he'd produced some things, and Clint had just answered the question and kept talking. Marcus drove back to North Hollywood in a daze. He kept replaying the conversation, the way Clint had listened, the way he'd talked about the work like it was the only thing that mattered. Marcus didn't tell anyone about the ride at first. It felt too private. But a few days later, he mentioned it to another driver. Just casually, had an interesting pickup Tuesday. Turned out to be Clint Eastwood. The other driver stared at him. "You drove Clint Eastwood and didn't know it?" "Not until after." The driver laughed and told dispatch, who told the owner of the car service. 2 weeks after that, Marcus got a call from a production company. They'd heard about the ride. They were working on a Clint Eastwood project. They needed drivers who were discreet and professional. Was Marcus available? He drove for that production. It was a small thing, just Clint's latest film, nothing Marcus worked on directly, just driving crew and occasionally producers to and from locations. But he was on set. He saw how Clint worked. Efficient, respectful, no drama. The set ran like a machine, but a machine that treated people like they mattered. Then Marcus drove for another production, then another. He met people not by pitching them in the car, but by being the driver who showed up on time, who kept his mouth shut about what he heard in the back seat, who treated the work with respect. People noticed that. They remembered. In an industry full of people trying to leverage every interaction into an opportunity, Marcus was just doing his job well. That was unusual enough to be memorable. And 3 years later, one of those connections, a producer he'd driven exactly twice, called him and asked if he was still writing. Marcus said yes. The producer asked to read something. Marcus sent his best script, the one about a father and daughter trying to forgive each other for things that couldn't be fixed. The producer called him 2 weeks later and bought it. It didn't make him rich. It didn't make him famous, but it got made. A small film, character-driven, people making hard choices, A father and daughter sitting in a hospital room trying to say things they'd never been able to say to each other. The kind of thing Marcus cared about making, the kind of thing that mattered to him, even though he knew it wouldn't play in 3,000 theaters. The film premiered at a small festival in 2007, not Sundance, not Cannes, a regional festival in Northern California that most people in the industry had never heard of. Marcus was there with his parents and the producer who'd bought the script and about 40 other people in a theater that seated 120. He didn't expect Clint to be there. This was not the kind of event that someone like Clint Eastwood attended. It wasn't covered. There were no cameras. It was just a screening. But 20 minutes before the film started, Marcus saw someone come through the theater entrance. Tall, silver hair. Moving with that same unhurried efficiency Marcus remembered from the car 4 years earlier. Clint walked in. He didn't announce himself. He didn't stop to talk to anyone. He just took a seat in the back row like anyone else. Like this was just another screening at just another festival. Marcus started to go over to him, then stopped. Clint had come to watch the film, not to be thanked for coming. So Marcus let it be. Clint sat in the back of the theater for the entire 93 minutes. He watched the whole thing. Marcus knew because he kept glancing back, unable to quite believe that Clint Eastwood was sitting in a theater that barely seated 100 people, watching a film that would maybe play a dozen festivals and then disappear. And when it was over, he found Marcus in the lobby. "You didn't quit," Clint said. "No, sir." "Good. The work shows it." That was all. Clint left. Marcus stood there in the lobby of a theater barely bigger than a living room, holding a plastic cup of cheap wine, understanding for the first time that success wasn't the validation he'd thought it would be. It was Clint Eastwood showing up to a screening nobody knew about because 4 years earlier he'd told a struggling writer not to quit, and he'd meant it. Here's what that car ride teaches us, if we're willing to learn it. Clint Eastwood didn't owe Marcus Webb anything. He was a driver, a replacement, someone who'd shown up because the regular guy got food poisoning. They would never see each other again after that terminal drop-off. Clint could have sat in silence for 40 minutes. He could have made polite small talk about traffic and weather and forgotten Marcus the moment he walked into the terminal. Nobody would have blamed him. That's the reasonable boundary between a passenger and a driver. But he didn't keep that boundary. He asked real questions. He listened to the answers. He gave advice that came from 50 years of actually doing the thing Marcus was trying to do. And then he gave him $200 for the conversation, not as charity, but as respect for the listening. And 4 years later, when Marcus made something that mattered, Clint showed up to see it. That's what character looks like when nobody's watching. Not the big gestures, not the public moments, but the 40-minute car ride with a driver who doesn't know who you are, and the screening that nobody's covering, and the quiet choice to treat people like their work matters because it does. Marcus Webb is still writing. He's had 3 scripts produced. None of them were blockbusters. All of them were things he cared about making. He still tells people about the car ride, not as a celebrity story, as a reminder that the work matters more than the outcome, and that the people who've been doing it the longest are often the ones who still remember what it felt like to be just starting. And every time someone asks him how he made it, he says the same thing Clint told him in the car that morning: don't quit unless you stop caring. If this story moved you, subscribe, hit the like button, and share it with someone who's trying to make something and wondering if they should quit. The answer is in whether they still care about the work. If they do, they haven't hit the quit point yet.